on rust and other forms of refusal. The art I was taught was prescriptive. 20 kids in a room, same materials, same template. A how-to dumbed down Bob Ross complex delivered by a kind, quirky teacher with a creatively unkempt demeanor. No questions were elicited, no curiosities provoked. Just a step-by-step guided tour of creativity. In third grade, I was working alongside my classmates. We had a new art teacher that year. Each of us was coloring a copy of a tropical bird perched on a branch. This wasn't a coloring page per se. We were prompted through the shapes and such, how to draw it. And we all created some janky version of the same-ish thing. This time around, mine was jankier than I liked. The colors from the Crayola markers were getting too dark, making the paper delaminate and ball up into oversaturated crumbs. In response, I asked if I could go get my other copy from my backpack. Because this curriculum was prepackaged and predictable, and because in spite of this sanitized approach to conformist creativity, I still absolutely loved making, drawing, and creating, I brought last year's version of the same thing to school. It was better. Cleaner lines, tighter shapes, colors arranged and applied with more directness, eliminating the overworked and overwrought sections I was so frustrated about this time around. My teacher was shocked. She looked at me like I had somehow predicted the future of her lesson plan. How do you already have this? Where did you get it from? As a third grader, I was shocked that she was shocked. It's not difficult to recognize boring patterns in school. It's only in retrospect that I now understand that this art teacher had simply inherited a curriculum and didn't even second guess it. The teacher of creativity didn't even create her own curriculum, let alone augment or personalize it in any way. She just flipped on the autopilot switch and ran the kiddos through, knowing that doing so would still prove to be a highlight in the day of children, desperate for a break from the conveyor belt of mindless conditioning, prepackaged and presented as education. Even if this bird and that bird were just slightly different, janky versions of the same-ish things. This is where I learned that what most systems call creativity is just decoration. Conformity dressed up in crayons and positioned as a spectacle, a distraction, a way of lulling the masses of the unruly into compliance with the illusion of creative freedom and self-actualization. Years later, I still think about that bird and how we're taught to color inside the lines that someone else told us to construct. How we're conditioned to follow without questioning why, and how that conditioning is governed by control mechanisms like poorly calibrated grades, approval from undeserving authority figures, or economies that reward the metastasizing self-replication of systems over the individuals that contribute to them. This early lesson has stuck with me. It's only ever fluttered around inside of the cage of my brain like an impatient bird waiting for its clipped wings to grow back. My work as an artist did not begin in rust, but it might as well have. Every project has circled around the same feeling, the absurdity of being handed something pre-scripted and pre-packaged and told, make it your own. Because I am a maker and a thinker, I do. I think and I make. I don't copy, I consider, I question, I engage. That's the work. And I suspect that that's where most creatives operate. Not inside of the pre-packaged, pre-approved how-to standards, but out where curiosity is given rein, where it is met with real attention, and where questions don't often yield answers, just better, more interesting questions. I didn't start rusting books out of some grand metaphor about decay or intellectual revolution. I started rusting books because I was tired of being told how to think and tired of being told what something meant. And maybe, more quietly, because I wanted to better understand what I felt daily as the kind of learner who did not school well. I wanted to understand more directly what it meant to be left behind. Years ago, I started finding books in odd places, on benches, on bus seats, in trash bins, in boxes marked free. Some were well used, dog-eared, annotated, their spines cracked like old knuckles. Others were pristine, clean, unspoiled, untouched, yet still abandoned. Those stuck with me the most. Somehow it's sadder when a book has never been read. There's something about language and ideas, even if only accidentally, being forgotten. Book bans and censorship aside. I couldn't help but feel like I was finding parts of myself in the shells of those books. As a dyslexic, I've always struggled with reading. Words are slippery. They shift under pressure. It takes effort for me to pin them down, to hold a sentence still long enough for it to resolve into something stable. Syntax and structure don't come easily to me, but ideas I can live inside. Thoughts I understand, even when words don't hold or when words leave me behind. So I started collecting the abandoned and the forgotten, not out of protest, but out of comfort and camaraderie. I knew what it felt like to be on the edge of understanding, but not given the time or space to be considered. I knew what it meant to be interested but not fluent in the approved standards, present but not quite included. I knew what it meant to work hard for a kind of access others seemed to be entitled to work as if they were owed it, and to sit back and quietly question the actual depth of their understanding. The books in some way quietly understood that. I began rusting them not to destroy them, but to keep them from falling or slipping back into silence. I treated them with oxidizing agents that sealed the text shut. Then I rusted through the outer layers. I made them unreadable, not to eliminate their content, but to ask what it means to be considered, even though you've been sealed shut. What does it mean to listen to something that cannot effectively explain itself any longer? As I have worked over the years, I've become increasingly less convinced that language or ideas are ever meant to stagnate or stay still. They're always in flux. Words are invented, mutated, discarded. New ideas require new symbols, which require new forms of attention. Every phrase we write is already dissolving into a future abstraction or misuse. And if language is always moving, already eroding under the weight of use and misuse, what does that say about how we are taught to treat it? To always expect clarity, to demand usefulness, to believe that meaning is just out there waiting, as if it hasn't already been rehearsed, packaged, framed, and then sold to us a dozen different times before we've even arrived. In working with and through Rust, I've started to think more seriously about what happens when meaning is engineered for us. And for me, Rust is just what language looks like when an idea refuses to be pinned down. We like to pretend that language is neutral, that reading is personal. that we each come to a page as an individual with unique thoughts and open minds. But the truth is, the path is usually already paved. We're not just encountering words, we're being guided through them, nudged, shaped, and offered the illusion of discovery while being told very quietly what to find. We're told what to look for, what to ignore, what tone to use, and when to nod along, when to move on, and how to listen without asking questions. The headline tells us how to feel. The pull quote tells us where to look. The copy is already condensed for maximum absorption and minimum disruption. It's not that we aren't allowed to think, it's that we are taught to think within a set of pre-approved shapes. And then we are expected to perch on a branch like a parrot and squawk along. Say the lines, hit the beat, mind the boundaries with your colors, and smile for your teacher. And when things become so familiar that they fade into background noise, familiarity can slip into the systemic. The flattening of complexity and of contradiction and of ambiguity doesn't just happen in books or in classrooms. It's everywhere. It's in the media, in the language of the politicians, in every press release that tells us exactly what to believe, how to interpret it, in every crisis recap with just enough space for outrage, but not enough for engagement or for memory. Years ago, Chomsky named this, not as a theory, but as a description of what I and many others are living through. He called this the spectator democracy. This is a system designed not to silence people, but to flood them with just enough information to feel informed, and just enough spectacle to keep them from noticing what's missing. A political and cultural architecture where individuals are permitted to consume narratives but not build them, where conclusions arrive already underlined, where participation is limited to applause or outrage, where nuance becomes a liability, and where legibility is a tool of control. Not control through censorship, but through saturation. Not through silence, but through distraction. The flood of messaging, the repetition of half-truths, the narrowing of attention into just 2 or 3 acceptable reactions. This is how passivity is maintained. It's not that the people aren't thinking, it's that they're not allowed space to think differently. And that's something that I'm trying to push against with these rusted books. When I rust a book, I'm interrupting its legibility. I'm resisting the need to wrap things up, to tie them into bows, or make them easily quote-worthy. The language in each object no longer cooperates with the logic of a headline. They don't perform for the attention economy. They refuse clarity on demand. Rusted books don't tell, they show. They expose the disregard for engagement and the utter abandonment of access to questions and curiosities that live beyond the reach of sanctioned narratives. Questions that are and are being erased when stories, histories, and ideas are redacted or banned from consideration altogether. And in a culture trained to spectate, not inquire, the silence that follows is no longer shock, it's indifference. Knowledge isn't about acquisition, it's about pursuit. The act of going after something slippery, the act of caring enough to follow a sentence even as it falls apart. This isn't a novel thought, but it's certainly one that remains deeply under-considered. The books I find and alter already exist in a state of cultural discard. They've been left behind, deemed irrelevant, or simply too slow for the pace of present-day meaning-making, and that makes them available in a different way. To rust them is to make their erasure visible. To rust them is to insist that they still hold weight. To rust them is to leave them unresolved, yet still speaking. And if this all sounds political, it is, but not in the lawn sign or picket sort of way. This is the politics of attention, politics of refusal. Politics as the refusal to let the most powerful tool of consciousness, language, be reduced to sound bites, scroll bait, or curated outrage. Rust slows things down. It corrodes the idea that everything must be readable, explainable, marketable. It pushes against the assumption that you only matter if you can be understood easily by everyone all at once. It complicates the smooth surface that spectator systems demand to maintain compliance. And it opens space for something else: ambiguity, confusion, abstraction, attention, time. Rusted Books isn't just a project about deterioration, and it's not about what's been lost. It's about how loss leaves a pattern, something to trace, and something to follow. About what happens when we stop asking, what does this mean? And start asking, what do we want to mean? Now that this is no longer doing what it was designed to do. It's about reading without being in control or being controlled. It's about listening without always being rewarded. It's about seeing abandonment not as loss, but as a place where new forms of meaning might take root. Rust, after all, isn't the end of something. It's just the beginning of a different sort of something.